This conference will now be recorded.
Great. So the thing that we did for the last 10 days was, completely with, let's say, infrastructure as a service, where we went ahead and, we played around with virtual machines and features like backup and recovery, Azure site recovery, point to site, virtual network peering, and then finally converting our virtual machines into, let's say, a DNS server, and then basically the automation with the ARM templates. Now, that was infrastructure as a service where you had to do all the management, where basically you only take the bare basic infrastructure for Microsoft and you maintained your public IPs. You made sure your public IP was static or dynamic, and you did all that stuff, right? Everything was done by you. In opposite to that, you have another offering called platform as a service, which is one of the most popular option, or rather, I would say, which is picking up a lot of popularity these days, because a lot of companies are not looking to go for infrastructure as a service because it is administration intensive. Okay, not a problem. It is administration intensive, meaning if you are an IaaS engineer, let's say with Azure, you are expected to have a very good understanding of the administration background, like how do you take backups, how do you monitor things out, how do you, let's say, do all that stuff and this and that. But whereas when you come to a platform as a service model, the only thing I'm really looking at is consuming the existing service of what Azure is giving me with, let's say, a moderate amount of control on what I can change and what I cannot change. Meaning, in order to convert my virtual machine into, let's say, an IIS server, meaning the only thing that I want to do right now is that I want to convert my virtual machine into an IIS server, a web server, and I want to start using that particular service as a website, right? That is the only thing that I wanted to do, because my at the end of the day, I am, let's say, a client based application, meaning my client is, going to come to my application, or my user is going to come to an application and basically interact with that application. In our example, irctc.co.in. So what I did is that I initially started off with creating a virtual machine. I made sure to attach disks to this virtual machine, and then I later decided whether this virtual machine is going to be public or private, depending upon whether this virtual machine will have a public IP or not. Then I went ahead into this particular virtual machine, logged into it, because this is the infrastructure layer what I got, and then I basically tweaked my OS or changed my OS. Like, let's say I installed something like a runtime when we are deploying, let's say, our code, right? Using Visual Studio, what did we do? We installed something known as a web deploy. We installed something known as, let's say, .NET Core SDK. We installed all those things on top of a virtual machine, and finally converted or finally installed a role called IIS on top of a virtual machine. Then came down to, let's say, our virtual machine, changed the port for and opened a port called 8172, changed the IP to static and all that stuff. And finally, using something like a VS Studio, like a Visual Studio, I was able to go ahead and, let's say, deploy my code on top of a virtual machine. Now, do I have to do all this procedure? Like, I had to take so much of headache, right? I had to basically take so much of pain. But all I wanted was to just deploy code on my virtual machine, or just deploy code somewhere, and that should start working. That's it. All I want is this. I don't want to go through so much amount of pain. Can someone do all this for me? Like, can someone take a virtual machine, go into the backend, decide whether it's a public or private? Like, most likely public, like put it a public. Install .NET Core dependencies on top of it, meaning install .NET Core runtime on top of it. Install IIS server on top of it, and directly give it to me as a package. Like, convert this entire thing into a package. Now, earlier what used to happen is that you had third party outsourcing companies for the same, which used to do all these things for you. telling that, hey, you know what, you don't have to worry. Give me your Azure account. I'll manage your Azure account. All I will do is like, convert the entire thing and, give it to you as a package. Why is it important? Let's imagine that I am a hospitality company, meaning I'm running a hotel industry. Will I want to focus on my customers to see how I can attract my customers and etc.? Or will I be interested in management of all these services? I mean, why will I, invest my focus, invest my money into, let's say, management of all these things out? Because that is something which is not really priority for me. My priority is my business, right? My priority is the business basically that I'm kind of delivering out there. And business in the sense, I need a very good website out there. I need a good looking website. I need basically a website that has good amount of functionality. So I will concentrate on my code rather than the infrastructure. So what this company used to do, let's say this is like an Novotel corporation. This company used to go for a third party company like Xenon and etc. Like you had a lot of companies like Zentak, Xenon, all these companies they used to have like the companies used to specialize in this, telling that hey, you know what, we'll sign a contract with Novotel. Novotel is our client right now. Now we'll go ahead, create the infrastructure, create all the backend infrastructure for Novotel, give it to them as a service so that they can just deploy it and they can just give the URL to the user. That's the only thing they wanted. Now Azure decided that you know what, or Microsoft decided that you know what, this is a profitable business model. That what if I don't give this contract to, let's say, what if I don't let third party companies manage all these things? What if I basically give the entire thing, meaning the VM, the disk, the public IP, the runtime, the IIS, everything basically packed together. What if I pack it together and give it to the customer directly? That is where platform as a service came into picture. Because this is a profitable business model, guys. Because practically speaking, no one wants to go ahead and manage my virtual machine, manage the disks and etc. Until and unless you want to do something like that. I mean, until and unless you want to tweak your operating system and all that stuff. But businesses today, if you look at businesses today, 90% of the businesses do not even know what their underlying infrastructure is. All they want to do is just have a very small team of IT who can manage things out and who can just give a outward looking application to the public, for which I rely upon a service called platform as a service model, where I say Microsoft that hey, you know what, not only the underlying infrastructure. In IaaS, what happened is like I basically was focusing only upon the infra layer, right? Where you had RAM, hardware, and all that stuff. Now I'm saying, you know what, I certainly want my RAM, I certainly want my hard disk and all that stuff, but I also want the top layer, which is the operating system, the runtime, and all that stuff, and the management of both the things. I don't want to basically spend my money, most importantly, spend my time on management of all these things. Rather, I want to basically focus on this layer, which is my code, because that is what will attract my customers. That is what basically will, that is what I want to really do out here, and I want to attract a lot of business using my code. Now, can I get something like this? The answer is yes, it is PAAS. So what are you really going to get in a PAAS? Is that you will get a virtual machine, meaning in the backend you have a virtual machine, Windows, Linux, that is something that you can decide. The RAM, the memory, all these things, something that you can decide. RAM, memory, and all that is something that you can decide. And you'll also be presented with a screen telling that, hey, you know what kind of a code are you going to deploy? You say if it is Java, Microsoft will say, you know what, I'll install something called as a Java SDK or Java JDK. It is Java SDK meaning software development kit. Or you are someone who's a Windows guy who wants to basically go with, let's say, ASP.NET full framework. Microsoft will say, you know what, I have a dependency for it. I need to install something called as an ASP.NET Kit. I'll install on top of it and give it to you. Or if you're someone who's basically going with something like a .NET Core, Microsoft will say, you know what, okay, fine. I also have something called as .NET Core SDK, Software Development Kit. I'll install that. Or right now, the trend today is like not .NET, not Java, but Python. Can you support that? Definitely yes. I'll install something called as PyCharm and give it to you so that you can just deploy your code and everything is good. Everything is great. So I support multiple languages like .NET, Java, PHP, Ruby, Python, all these things. All this is my headache. Finally, I will give you a service. And this service today I'm calling as a web app or an app service. A web app or an app service is nothing but a virtual machine in the backend exposed to the public, exposed to the public, and it will, I mean, you will, the users basically can just come and use this particular application. So I have a virtual machine, underlying hardware, software, everything is being managed by Microsoft. It is being now exposed as an application service. This is the logo of, let's say, the app service, which is one of, let's say, the flagship model of Azure. Like, I have not seen customers using Azure and not knowing about application services. It's a flagship model and it is pretty easy to learn, pretty easy to interact with. You do not have to take a lot of headache of management and all that stuff. Then the point is, how do I create an application service? Yes, you can certainly create it on the portal. You can do, let's say, automation, you can do a lot of things, but let's start or let's begin our journey with the portal. I'll say, okay, fine, create a new resource group. I'll say web application. I'll say ECS2. Review and create the resource group out. And once I have the resource group, we'll go into the resource group and I'll say add a resource. I'll say add a web app. Now it'll say, okay, fine, create a web app. And as opposed to, let's say, creation of a virtual machine, this is a pretty simpler service. And very importantly, you will have to understand one thing is that this is a pure application service in its heart, in its core, in its soul. It's a pure application service. If you're creating a web application, you are creating this as an application service. That's it. It's a web server. That's it. You cannot convert it into a DNS. You cannot do all that stuff. It's a pure web server. So I'll say, okay, fine. Give a name to my web server. I'll say it is web server 2ZZ000, something like this. Again, 3 to 24 characters, not less than 3, not exceeding 24. Unique in nature and no special characters. As in when I type this name, it said, okay, fine, your name of the web app is not web server 2ZZ000. It is web server 2ZZ00.azurewebsites.net. This is called a fully qualified domain name, or in short, FQDN. Domain names are also provided by Azure, managed by Azure. SSL certificates are also managed by Azure. You don't even have to worry about the SSL. SSL is also managed by Azure. So you are out of the box getting a secured website as such. So I'll say, okay, fine, great. Now it's asking me, how do you want to publish your code? Are you doing a code or are you doing something known as a Docker container? Now, for now, let's ignore what Docker container is. We'll talk about it later. I'll say I am publishing a code. Now Microsoft is asking me, what kind of a code are you publishing? .NET? If it's .NET, then I have ASP.NET full framework. I have .NET Core. If it's Java, I have Java 11, Java 8. If it is Node.js, I have like Node 14, 12. PHP, I have so much. Python, Ruby. These are something that I support today. And what else can you think about, apart from this, guys? Like, did you hear any programming language apart from this? Like, you have Golang supported by Google and all that stuff, yes. But most widely used, right? Either .NET, Java, Node, Python, PHP, widely used. So I'll say, okay, fine. It is .NET Core 3.1 LTS long-term support. This is something that I want right now. And then Microsoft says, hey, you know what? You have selected .NET Core 3.1 LTS, which can run both on Linux and Windows platforms. So do you want to choose whether you want a Linux or a Windows underlying, like the underlying operating system, whether you want a Windows platform or whether you want a Linux platform? I'll say, okay, fine. For now, I'll select it's a Windows. Now it's asking me a region. I'll just select an existing region out here, like East used to. And this is what, guys, this is my runtime. Meaning, when I created a virtual machine, I went into that virtual machine, installed something called as .NET Core dependencies and all that stuff. This is what Microsoft is doing right now. Microsoft is taking care of it right now, and the operating system. Then what about the infrastructure? Because infrastructure layer is something which is very important for me, right? That infrastructure layer is decided by something called as an app service plan. App service plan is the one which decides your infrastructure layer. Meaning, what all do you get out here? Now, since I'm on a free trial subscription, it is by default giving me something called as an F1. It's not letting me change this. So I will by default create this with F1 plan only. We'll discuss more about the plans once the application is created. So I'll say next. I will basically say disable this out, and monitoring, I will take this as a separate class. So monitoring also will just disable this out. I'll say no. I'll say review and create. So all I'm doing is creating a web application, creating a web server that is running on a Windows platform, that is basically that which basically accepts a code called .NET Core 3.1 or a .NET Core version of it, and which has an underlying infrastructure, which we are going to discuss about what an app service plan is. And one most important thing is that you cannot create a web app without an app service plan, because this is the underlying infrastructure, and you cannot create an application without an underlying infrastructure. Then how many web apps can you put under one app service plan? No limitation as such. Let's say in my case, I have decided that I need a 1 GB memory for my app service plan. If I have three different web applications, one, two, three, these three web applications will be sharing a 1 GB memory. Depending upon the usage, Microsoft is going to allocate the amount of memory for a web application. And very importantly, your app service plan and your web apps should be in the same region. It cannot be like your web application is in one region, your app service plan is in the other. You cannot do that. You have to make sure that your app service plan and the web app are in the same region. Now it went ahead and created it. So since it's got created, let's talk about the app service plan. So I'll go to the resource. This is how my web application will kind of look like. It's a resource in Azure. You have stop, you have restart, and all that stuff. But my main point here is not all these things, but I have something known as an app service plan out here. My app service plan is this. It is telling that the ASP is like something like this. It's an F1 tier. It's a free tier that I have like allocated to you. Let me click on this and I go into the app service plan. So if you look at my resource group right now, which is called web application, I have a web app. I have an app service plan under it. I'll go into the app service plan, and under the app service plan, I have an option on the blades called apps, which tells me what are all the apps that are running inside this particular plan. And I have only one application, so it is showing only one application. But very importantly, we'll talk about what scale up and all, but I want to show what are the options that are available, what is the pricing model of the app service plan that we have. Three things, guys: dev, test, production, isolated. Three different tiers what you can actually select. I mean, you can select this even while creation of the web application, but since we are using a free trial account, that option is no longer available. So you can change the app service plan after the creation of web app. Yes, you can do it at any point in time. You can do it. What is the time? 2 seconds or less than 10 seconds. Anytime we scale up, meaning if you want to go from a lower app service plan to a higher app service plan, the time is just in seconds. So as of now, we are running on, let's say, something known as a shared infrastructure with 1 GB memory, 60 minutes of compute daily, meaning 60 minutes your application will be available every day. Recommended for testing purposes only. And here it says, you know what, I'm giving you memory and I am giving you a backend storage account which you won't be able to see, which I will manage, and I will give you an underlying disk of about 1 GB. After that 1 GB, what is going to happen? Your web app is going to throw an error telling that, you know what, I do not have any memory more. That's how the model is actually going to work. Can I only increase the underlying disk? No, you cannot do that because this is what? A platform as a service model. So you won't be able to manage independent resources. You'll have to manage it as a whole. So what do you mean by shared infrastructure out here? Here you have a label called shared infrastructure. What do you mean by that is that whenever you are creating a web application, you are getting an underlying infrastructure getting allocated to you, right? In some data center in East US2. And you have a physical server from where you have the application and all that's running for you. Let's imagine this is your physical server one. Now, can I place it like availability set and availability zone? No, you cannot do it. Even that is an option that you do not have in applications because that is something that is managed by Microsoft in the backend. Fine. Then, if let's say there is a different customer, I am X, this is Y, who's creating a web application in the same plan called F1, are there chances that Microsoft can allocate him the same server? Answer is probability is very high, yes. Because I am giving it to you for free. I am not charging you anything for that. It's a shared infrastructure, meaning applications not only from your own tenant, applications from a different tenant ID can also share the same infrastructure. That is the operation model what I'm exposing out to the customer. Let's say you are not comfortable with it. Let's say you don't want to share your infrastructure with anyone. You will have to scale up your app service plan and you have different options for that. Starting from B1, even D1 is a shared infrastructure. Starting from B1, you have 100 total ACU. ACU is Azure Compute Units. It's like the processor that you have. 100 ACU, meaning like what happens if I reduce my ACUs? The speed of your website kind of gets reduced. So the more amount of ACU, the more powerful you are. 1.75 GB of memory, meaning RAM, and A series compute equivalent, meaning when you go and purchase a laptop, right? They'll tell you it's an i3 processor, an i4, i5 processor, or an AMD Radeon processor. Microsoft is telling you it's an A series compute unit that I'm giving you, and the price that I'm paying. Now see guys, the price that I'm paying is 3,944 rupees. If I were to create the same thing in a virtual machine, right, the price is drastically low. Like if I go for a 1.75 GB of memory, the price is not so much. So the pricing model is also different when you compare it with, let's say, the infrastructure as a service, because here Microsoft is not only charging you for, let's say, the service, it's also charging you for the maintenance because this is completely managed by your platform. The more capacity that you go, the greater is the price. Meaning if I go for 7 GB memory out here, 15,777 rupees, and I am also getting features like scaling of my application, memory, Storage is increased to 10 GB, not 1 GB, as opposed to custom domains. I can also basically not go for a .azure websites.net. Can also go for a custom domain name, but you still think it is not sufficient because your applications are in production. Microsoft gives you a different workload for production based tiers, which is the production pricing tier starting from S1, P1, V2, P2, V2, P3, V3. All these things are production based workloads. And if let's say you are going for a premium plan, which is 3.5 GB of memory, and you are getting a TV2 series equivalent compute, meaning your processor is also getting increased. Now see the amount of price that you have. The price tag that you have is like it's actually a lot. And the more you go, like the more you push yourself, the more options is what you get out here. Like you have staging slots, we'll see what all slots and all. You also have something known as a backup, basically all these things that are getting attached to it. And finally, you have something known as an isolated tier. Isolation, or also called as app service environment, ACE in short, ASE, is you telling Microsoft that you know what, this is not a public application, this is a private application. So when I was creating a virtual machine, what I did is that I selected a public IP or a private IP or none, right? I mean, I selected public IP or none out there. I'm just telling Microsoft that you know what, this is a private application, but this is my way of telling Microsoft that you know what, this is a private application. Please create it in a different tier called isolation altogether. The name resolution, load balancing, all these things will be taken care by Microsoft in this particular application service environment. Very, very costly, especially used for banking and that sort of workloads. It's very, very, very costly to deal with. This is about app service environment and the three pricing tiers. These are called pricing tiers that you have in, let's say, while creating an app service plan. But when we were creating, we only got an F1. Reason being, we were using a free tier, account. So that's the reason Microsoft did not give you anything else to create. So I was forced to create it in an F1. But you can change that to something else at a later point in time. Apply it. It'll take less than seconds, and it'll go ahead and apply it out. And your app service plan will get increased from S1 to F1. It took less than about 10 seconds. Now your app service plan right now is not running on an S1 tier. Rather, sorry, it's not running on an F1 pricing tier. Rather, it's running on an S1 tier. This was about app service plans, guys. Guys, any questions still here? Any questions about PAAS? Anything? Anything, guys? Oh, I just saw Komal's message. Komal, are you able to see my screen? Are you there on the call? And if yes, yeah, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now I can able to see.
Great.
Uh, This
Hello?
ASP service, is there any maintenance?
ASP service, the maintenance is actually taken care by Azure. The
Okay, their
entire
maintenance.
maintenance is taken, entire tier is taken care by them. So that's the reason I'm calling it as a platform as a service and not an infrastructure as a service.
Okay, and there won't be any downtime or anything such thing for this, right?
There definitely will be. I mean, see, at the end of the day, Sanjay, it's like about the physical server that I'm talking about, right? There definitely will be a downtime, which is like, human factors that, kind of get involved. Like, let's say there's a wear and tear on the server. You cannot really do anything about it. But the downtime really is like, in seconds. You won't even notice it. The downtime really is like, let's say in seconds or in a millisecond basically out there.
Okay. Again, do we have any options like HA and all in this also? Like
Yes, we can.
multiple
We'll also
ASPs?
discuss about it. Yes, we can discuss about that. Like what is the HA, high availability, and all that stuff. That is something that we'll have to manage and all. So we will discuss about how do you load balance all these things, like let's say a virtual machine and etc.
And monitoring will be done by them, or we need to configure any monitoring?
No, you'll have to configure monitoring. And right now, when I was creating it, I did not configure monitoring because I didn't want to, explain monitoring at this point in time. But there is a monitoring application called Application Insights, which is a very, very powerful tool. You can use that particular tool in order to monitor this out.
Okay. And again, access provision, same as previous, like how we provide. So we need to manage whom we need to provide access, right?
Exactly. You can manage whom you need to provide access using the identity and access management out here.
Okay. For this, we need to give them a web link kind of thing, or how the users will access.
So as and when I created the service, right, I have a URL that got created with it. So this is my web app, not the app service plan. So I've come basically out from my app service plan and I've gone into my web app out here. So I'm going into the resource group again and going into the web application. And as and when I created the web application, I have a URL out here, a direct URL, a HTTPS URL. And as and when you click it, you will get a very sample homepage telling that, hey, you know what, app service developers, this is your web application, and even this is secured. The SSL certificate is kind of managed by Microsoft Corporation, and you have a validity for that as well, like a 1 year validity basically that you will get basically by this. So even the SSLs are managed by Microsoft. All these things
This is
are
public.
managed. Sorry,
Please go ahead. This
yeah, yeah.
is a public URL, right? Anybody can use
This
it.
is the public URL. Yes, by default, web applications are public in nature. By default, they are public in nature. But having that said, you cannot do an RDP into it because you are not exposed to the underlying infrastructure as such. Even if I try doing an RDP into it, it won't allow me to do an RDP into it. Even if I basically take this out and all, no matter what, I won't be able to do an RDP into it. I won't be able to do an RDP into this particular server because I am not allowed to look into the backend. And Microsoft manages all the security in the backend. But by default, a web application is a public service. It is a web server that is accessed over the internet. How are the ports management and all? Not your headache. Microsoft is going to take care of it. HTTPS, sorry, the 443, AT and everything is being exposed to you and given to you as a service. Right now, it's telling that the remote computer is not accessible and all because it is like that. The service is itself like that. So it is by default a public service where people can directly click on this link and kind of look into this particular website. And does it answer your question, Chandra?
Yes. And we cannot use web apps for the private use.
You can. You definitely can. I'll also tell you how you can. And I was talking about app service environments, right? App service environment is for your private use.
Okay.
We were talking about something known as an isolated tier, right? Out here, when
Y-
we were talking about
yeah, plus like intranet kind of websites
intranet
for the
applications,
employees.
yes. So isolated is for intranet, but very costly. Can you change something which is public into private? Yes, you can change definitely. We'll also discuss how you can change that and all in the networking concept of it. Okay. But if I'm not able to do an RDP, guys, if I'm let's say I'm not able to basically do an RDP, then how do I manage this service? How do I really manage this service? Because for a user, it's good, not a problem. But how do I, as my company's administrator, how do I administer this resource? Because the code on top of which, or the code that sits on top of the application, is something that I can decide, right? That's something that that Microsoft allows me, let's say, the luxury to decide that. Then how do I basically transfer my code into my application? Now, web applications by default support deployment using Visual Studios. They support something known as an FTP, file transfer protocol, meaning there's a port called port 21 which is open by default for the web applications, and this is allowed to do. Then how do I basically transfer my code? For which, let's go ahead and let's download a sample HTML template like we do. So free HTML templates. Yeah, free HTML templates. Basically go ahead and download whichever template is available. So this template is available, which is good. I'll just go ahead and let's say download this out. Download it. Great. I'll extract this out. And all I want to do is, let's say, deploy all this code into my application. That's it. This is the only thing that I want to do. For that, I'll have to connect with my application, and I want to do what? An FTP protocol out here, meaning a file transfer protocol out here. So there are a lot of tools out there available, like FileZilla, like WinSCP, and etc. So I have a tool with me. If I'm not wrong, I should have installed it out. Yeah, I have a tool called WinSCP. How do you download it? Very simple installation, guys. Just say WinSCP download. Go to the link. Download this and install it. Very, very, very simple installation. Just click next, next, and next, and install this out. That's it. Once you install it, you'll have something like the icon coming up calling WinSCP. I just open this tool out here. Let's take like a bit of time to open this out. And it says, okay, fine. Now tell me, what do you want to do? I'll say, yes, I want to do an FTP process. I want to connect with a remote computer. I'll take the URL of this particular. Now here you have something known as an FTP hostname on the overview page. I'll take the URL. I'll copy and paste this out. It's telling FTP port number is 21, which is open, which is good, which is great. Give me the username and password. Now, which username and password will you give? Will you give the username and password to the Azure account that you have? You can, but it'll throw an error because it won't know which computer that you're using, right? For which you have something known as get publishing profile out here. So I'll say, okay, great. And I'm only able to see this again because I am an administrator. You can control the access on what people can see, what people can do with your web application. Not everyone can access it. You can control the users, what they can see, what they cannot see, and all that stuff. If it's a reader, they won't be able to accept this. They won't be able to do anything with their application. They only will be able to use the service. So I'll say, okay, fine. Get this publishing profile, and it's downloaded, let's say, a document out here, which is publishing settings. I'll say right click, open with notepad, and I have a huge publishing setting out here, like telling all these things and out. But the only thing that I need here is the username, which is this. So I'll take this username. I'll go to my WinSCP tool. Where is my WinSCP tool? Fine. Into my WinSCP tool and take my password out, which is this, the entire string. That's it. I just need these two things out here. Paste my password out here, and I'll say login. So this is trying to now establish a remote connection with the server, and you see this, right? Site www root. The same thing what we got on an IIS server. When we installed IIS, we had something called as site, and then inside that you had something known as a root folder inside it. You had a folder called inetpub. Under that inetpub, you had something known as site. Under the site, you had something known as root, where you had something called as your IIS, basically, image basically that is running. Here, The only reason my web application is able to run, the only reason my web application is able to see this, or you are able to see this, is because you have something called as a HTML or a hosting start.html page out here. What if I delete it? You do not have permission to view this directory because there is no file at all. There is no file at all in this particular folder. I've like kind of deleted everything out. So that is the reason you're not able to see anything. Now then, how do I transfer my code? So I'll basically copy the path where, in my system that I downloaded this out. I'll go to my WinSCP tool. I'll say my folder is this, browse for it. Okay. This is all the folders. This is everything that I need to basically get transferred into my application, right? Now the left side of my screen is my local computer where where I've downloaded all this code. The right side of the screen is a remote computer or a web application which is listening on a port called port 21, which is FTP. I'll take this, I'll paste it. That's it. Very, very simple drag and drop. I dragged it, I dropped it inside it, and it'll take like a couple of minutes out here to do an FTP protocol because FTPs basically are a very slow process. Like the rate of transfer is very low. So it will take like a minute or two to go ahead and transfer this out. And once it is transferred, you'll see all, let's say, the code and everything basically inside it. And you can start using your application back again. So let's give it a second so that it will, transfer all my images, all my folders into it. So what I did again to give a recap, I went inside my web application. I clicked on get publishing profile. I downloaded a tool called WinSCP, which is a file transfer protocol tool. I took the FTP hostname. I put my FTP hostname inside the login. I took the password from the get publishing profile and I logged into my web application and I was able to see something called as site root. I took all the files that I had. I just put it inside, let's say, this particular application out here. Now, after a couple of minutes, if I just give it a refresh, you'll now be able to see your application running. I did not have to do IIS. I did not have to do my code. I did not have to do anything. All I did is just took my application. I just deployed it on top of, let's say, the service. That's it. And the application started running. Then does it also support transferring applications using Visual Studio? Because most of the developers are very interested not to do an FTP because this is a very, very, very old, a very basically manual process which no one is rather using right now. But you will have to know how you can do an FTP into, let's say, a web application, and this is as simple as this. But can I use Visual Studio also? Yes, yes, certainly you can use Visual Studio also. So I'll open my Visual Studios. I basically have a lot of .NET applications already. I created a couple of .NET applications for my demos. So I'll use one of the application basically, like an ASP.NET Core project out here. I'll open the solution file of it. So I just open the solution file and I have the application up and running. So let's give it a second. It's a huge application, so it'll take some time to load. And for again, when we were doing, let's say, a virtual machine, right? In order to deploy your code, let's say from Visual Studios, meaning if you need to deploy your code from a Visual Studio and if Visual Studio needs to support, let's say, external deployments, what all did we do, right? We went into IIS management. We did a lot of things out there, and we opened up a port called 8172. We made a static, IP, and we put a DNS name label and all that stuff, and then only we were able to do our deployments. Now I have my code. Now let's say I'll just call this as web application code from Visual Studio from VS. I'll just save this out. I'll just go to my the CS proj file of it. I'll just do a right click here. I'll do a publish. This is going to load a publishing profile. I'll say okay, fine, I need a new publishing profile out here because this is taking from an old basically deployment that I did. So I'll say new, and this is what you guys would see if you have a new deployment. It will now ask what is your target. Now remember guys, when we were selecting or when we were doing a virtual machine, right, we selected Azure and we selected Azure virtual machine. Now I'll say it is an Azure app service that is working on a Windows. Go to next. It'll by default basically have the account out here, and it'll say enter the credential and all that stuff. Okay, come on. Okay, it looks like it got stuck. Okay. Yeah, this happens a lot with, let's say, Visual Studio. So the only thing I need to do is like give my credential, select my web application, and start deploying my code on top of it. That's it. There is nothing that I need to do. Everything is again managed by Microsoft, and they charge for it. Definitely, they do charge for it. But everything underlying is managed by Microsoft, and you do not have to take care of a lot of things out here. Since this got stuck, we'll just come back here and allow it some time to just come back again. So all you have to do is like go into your Visual Studio, select the application, enter your account, and then select the web application and deploy the code on top of it. That's it. Your code will get transferred from Visual Studio to your web application in no matter, like in a very short span of time. It will go ahead and it will get deployed. That is how you can start using this application. And very importantly to remember, it is a public service. It's a public application that is out of the box, which is assigned an IP backend. Like the IP basically is assigned in the backend. Everything is taken care by Microsoft. And if you want to also look at the IP basically that got assigned to it, I'll do a DNS lookup. And here you go. This is, let's say, a public IP basically that got attached to it. This is a public IP basically that got attached to it. 2049.97.3. It will block the access because this is not SSL and all that stuff. So you'll have to come through the domain name of it. But the public IP and everything managed by Microsoft. Everything as such is managed by Microsoft. And this is, let's say guys, the DNS name label for your public IP. .eastus2.cloudapp.azure.com. The same thing is what we configured manually while we were creating a virtual machine. The DNS name label was actually configured by us. Here Microsoft is going to configure everything. Microsoft is also going to publish your DNS records. Microsoft is going to do all that stuff for you and give it to you as a web application. The only thing that you need to do is start consuming, and this is a very, very powerful application, guys. Believe me, a lot of companies use it. A very powerful application because at the end of the day, something that I am looking for is like management of my business, and this is the right application for it. Just give me a second. Let me see if my Visual Studio Code is back. Just try to enter my credentials. I think it's going to ask me for an email. Yeah, I do not have this email ID, not a problem. I'll just get it done later. I'll I'll get it done later because right now it's saying re-enter my credentials and all that stuff, which is okay, not a problem. But once you have it, like once I have the credentials, you can directly go ahead and deploy things out on the web application. Not an issue at all. So guys, any questions that I can take from this particular topic?
If we are using a Python, then there is a different way to the publish the code, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Mhm.
So also the framework what you're running your web application should change. You cannot run a Python on top of a .NET, a web application that is basically on a .NET, core. Right now, this is on a .NET core. How do I know it? There is something called as configuration for the web application, and under the configuration, you have a couple of settings out there. So this will, yeah, under the configuration, you have some settings out there. Here, the stack that I'm running on is a .NET core stack. You'll have to change this to Python if you want, let's say, to run on a Python. And you can take a version, or you do not, if you do not want, you can, you do not have to give a version explicitly out there. So the stack that you're running your web application really becomes important. You cannot deploy a Python on top of a .NET because it won't run, because it needs something like PyCharm and underlying things out there that will get installed when you change the stack of your application. When you change the stack setting of your application, that's when it's going to go ahead and change out. So was that your question, Chandra?
Yes, we cannot run both, right? Python and .NET stacks
No, you
on the
cannot
same
run
app.
both. No, you cannot do that. But on a virtual machine, you can do it.
Okay.
Any further questions, guys? Anything else? And one very important thing is that you are charged for the app service plan. The charge that you basically get incurred is for the app service plan and not the apps that are running under it. You are charged for the app service plan, meaning you are charged for the infrastructure and not the applications that are running on top of it. So if you add like multiple applications, are you charged more? No. The charge is only for your app service plan. That's the reason they're giving the charge out here directly. This is the charge what Microsoft, kind of charges you out of the box. So the charge is not for, let's say, the web application that is running, but the charge is for the app service plan on which the web application is running. So that is the pricing model on which they base this out on. Any further
Yeah.
questions, guys? Anything else? Yeah,
So that means so we can use multiple applications like .NET one and another one is Python,
exactly.
and different URLs. So,
Different
but the
URLs,
charge,
yes.
but the charge will be the same if you use one or two, no matter
Two,
how
yes.
many you are
No
using.
matter how many.
Okay, great.
Is any further questions that I can take before closing the session today? Okay, so the thing what you need to do today is like, please go ahead, look into the documentations of an Azure web app, understand what an Azure web app is, what you get and all that stuff. You can just say Azure web app documentation. You have app service documentation, app service, Azure web app, the same thing. Says what app services and all that stuff, and it'll give you a whole set of documentation out here. And also, please go ahead and try practicing this out. Like today, I do not have the credentials, so that sorry, I do not have the credential basically, so I wasn't able to show how a deployment basically from Visual Studio is. But I'll get the credential tomorrow, and I'll also explain that also. So any more questions, guys? Any more questions that I can take before we close it? Okay. So please do this, guys, and happy learning, and we'll meet tomorrow. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.